I'm Jon Altschuler.
I'm Scott Bennett. We've known each other for almost 50 years.
We grew up together on the playground.
And now we're in the foreground and still growing up.
From the playground to the foreground.
Join the conversation. We're back. Another episode. I'm Scott Bennett here with Jon Altschuler. And Jon, how are you?
Great.
I thought this morning I wanted to share something with you now that we've done a few episodes. I don't, like any good fighter, I roll up to the building, have a usual process that I follow in the mornings of that we're going to do this. And I have a song I listen to. I don't know what you do. I'm curious about that, but I wanted to share with you what I listen to and see how it strikes you. Are you familiar with the song, The Twilight Zone by Golden Earring? You ever heard that?
Perhaps.
So it's a pretty well-known song.
Is it 80s?
Yeah, it is. It's a one, they had one song basically that was very popular. But it's funny that that's what I listen to, that I'm pulling up to the building and feel like it's the Twilight Zone every time we're about to do an episode. And I just thought I'd share that with you now. Been waiting, holding back on you a little bit. So curious, what do you do before we get here?
I just drive here.
You just drive here in silence?
I had the radio on.
Yeah?
Yeah.
News or music or what?
I listened to just a couple radio stations still.
Yeah. All right, well.
Ads, the whole thing.
Right. I would expect, because there's no Sirius in your car,
it's
right?
like it's the 1980s. I don't pay for a subscription.
Yeah, no subscription in the car. I know that. Well, listen, I mentioned to you, and I think I told you when we were walking that I was going to take my little brother, Trace, to the Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and we did that yesterday. So here's the green upstander man. And I got to tell you, I might get emotional for a second. To take an 11-year-old boy, he said he'd been there, but I don't think he had. We spent a couple hours, and it was a pretty quiet day at the museum. He asked, where was everybody? Which, good question. But I mean, it's open. It's not open that often, but it was an amazing experience. And you and I have talked in a lot of our conversations about that particular building. And I don't want to focus too much on the building, although I would recommend to everybody that if you haven't been, you got to go. I'm going to go back. I think probably going to go back in a week or two. I told my wife last night I didn't have enough time yesterday, specifically in this time. But what struck me, and I think you and I talk about a lot of things in Dallas, was when I was looking for parking, and I've been to the building, that when I pulled into the garage across the street, and I've been in that garage, the cost of my parking. And I just wanted your opinion. Do you have any concept on what you think it might have cost?
Garage parking is expensive. I don't do it.
Yeah, I don't typically do it either. I tried to park on the street, but there were some rules about 4 to 6 p.m. and I'm not often in the West End, so not as familiar. But because I didn't want to be late and disappoint the child, I pulled into the garage, and it was $12.50 plus $1 rake or service fee, so $13.50 in that garage. And just curious, like why is garage parking so expensive? And when we want people to go to our downtown, from your perspective, why isn't it more accessible?
It's expensive to build parking, first of all. Second of all, you could have taken DART for $3 and avoided parking. Yeah, I agree. 3, you could have figured out the street parking because certain directions are closed from 4 to 6, but other directions are open.
Yeah.
So,
but if you're not familiar, right? I mean, most people, you happen to be very familiar, but the average Joe, it's me, not as familiar with the 4 to 6 rule.
Right.
And just for the record, Trace and I, we took some time to sort of reflect on our experience upstairs on the patio, and we could hear the DART. And I asked him if he had ever been on the DART, or him and his family, and he had not, which is whole nother conversation for another day. Mm-hmm. But you're right. We could have done that. It goes right there. But
the reality is we have lots of parking. We have street parking. We have tons of garage spaces. The county just built a new garage. I feel like I wish our city had more frequency of public transit. We have transit, we have lines, we have buses. They don't run very frequently. And I understand it's all an issue of economics, but I think when I travel to other great cities around the world, the frequency of public transit availability is much higher in those places than in our place.
Yeah, I did. Over the years, when we went to the zoo, I always wanted to take my children on DART. We'd go to Forest Lane and at that station and pick it up. I agree with you. And I just hope we're going that direction. I know I recently moved from suburban, kind of R75248, and shout out to my 75248 people. I miss you. But right in my particular area, they're building a station, and it's been the DART has extended. So
right.
I'll be interested to see how people utilize in the future, and hope they do. So Jon, one other thing, last night, shortly before I went to bed, I was catching up on some Olympic coverage, and I happened to look, and I thought this interesting thing.
Real quickly, where are you watching the Olympics? Like, what do you watch?
So specifically, where do I watch, or what?
I'm watching NBC only.
Yeah, you told me. Well, you only have an antenna,
right.
So right. I have access to all the extra coverage, and there is a lot of it. There's replays. I mean, you really get the full deal. If you want to watch it later on your terms, you can. But I'm not watching badminton or ping pong. I want that to be clear. But while I was watching, I happened to notice last night that there were 41 Texans participating in the Olympics, and 21 North Texans. And the most interesting thing to me, although it just struck me, is that of the Texans that are participating, we would have had 33 gold medals as of last night, tied with Japan for the same number. That's number 8. So we're not just a national power, we're a world power in terms of quality of athletics, I think, and athletes. Just curious what you think.
I mean, I think it's great, but I also keep in mind that we're 10% of the American population. We have 5 of the nation's 12 largest. We have 5 of the nation's 20 largest cities. So you'd think that we should statistically be faring this way.
Yeah, no, you pointed that out. I think it's a great fact, but still the amount of actual gold medals, which means like you're the top performers, and we love top performers. You and I talk about that. I mean, that's pretty incredible, right?
It is incredible. I also think that to focus on gold medals is very American. If you think about the Olympics, they're celebrating places 2 and 3 almost as much as they celebrate place 1. And I think that's the beauty of the games, is that you do celebrate 1, 2, and 3. If you think about the steeplechase yesterday, you had that kid Brooks, I think from the United States, who's like coming out of nowhere to lead at the end. The guy from Morocco passes him. Our guy falls to 3rd place and then does everything he can to get 2nd place. I think that's just the Olympics. It's like, hey, those 3 spots, we value them all. Well, so I'd point that out, that it's great that we'd be tied with Japan for 1st, but that's an American viewpoint that I think the world doesn't share.
And I thought you were going to go with, in many instances, for some countries, it's just having an athlete there, which I think is really compelling. Like certain sports where they've never participated, or it's been many decades and now they're back in, is incredible. So lots of really interesting stories. Look forward to being in the United States, maybe one day, Dallas, and something we can talk about with our guest, I hope.
That's right. Our guest is Ken Malcolmson, a great friend of mine. He's on a well-worn path in our city as someone who's moved to our city, stayed here, built a great career, and then given back in immense ways. So we're excited to have him here today.
You can find us on social media at Playground Foreground.
Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel and subscribe. So we're here with Ken Malcolmson, the CEO of the North Dallas Chamber. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
I want to tell you guys, so my first foray back to the Katy Trail this summer, I run randomly into Malcolmson, talk to him for 10 minutes. I walk south on the trail. I run into you.
Oh,
we walked for like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And so I thought, hey, it'd be great to bring everybody together on the show. So that was how we got the idea to bring you today.
Well, thank you.
So we're all Katy Trail types.
Yeah,
that's right.
I love that. We'll have to get a walk in. I love that.
For sure. And speaking of that, John, I actually live right on the Katy Trail. And we actually, from our home, we actually have a gate that opens right onto the trail. So I'm out there quite often.
You're slightly closer than me. We just moved to the trail.
Oh, did you?
We'll talk about where that is.
That's great.
But we'll get a walk in.
That's great.
Such a pleasure to meet you, Jon. Thanks for the introduction.
Of course.
I think you probably know that Jon and I are North Dallas guys. I'm born and raised.
I think we're far North Dallas guys.
Yeah, we are far North Dallas guys. Sorry about that.
That's right.
Clear. We want to delineate that for sure. As far north as Dallas goes, we are Dallas. But great to have you here. And I just curious as we get started. You and Jon know each other, I think, dating back to SMU. But aren't originally from Dallas, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm from Chicago originally.
Okay.
But came to Dallas to go to SMU. So that was the motivation.
And never left, right?
No, I actually left 3 times in my adult life, my business career. During my business career, I moved to Hartford, Connecticut, Chicago, and St. Louis. Okay. But each time I moved away, I moved back to Dallas. And then the last time I moved back to Dallas, which is now close to 20 years ago, I said, never again. This is home. Not only home, but this is what I'm passionate about is this city. And frankly, I'm passionate about my alma mater too, SMU.
Well,
careful. I think Scott over time is showing symptoms of like he just feels left out that he didn't get to go to SMU. So we'll have to help him through that.
Poor guy. I'll tell you what.
Well, I mention occasionally that first of all, I'm completely impressed by SMU. I've a daughter still in college. I have spent more time, even just in the geographic proximity, have watched, I love driving down Mockingbird and seeing just changes. It's a fabulous place. So you guys, all kidding aside, I hope this year I get invited by one or both of you to attend a few of the ACC events. So don't leave me out.
Going to be a fun year.
I know how to dress. I know the colors.
That's right. And you can come to the Boulevard too.
Yeah, I know.
Enjoy the
I
social
haven't.
experience.
John has invited me, I think once or twice, and then I think he thought better of it to go forward. But I think this is my year, so I'm looking forward to it.
There you go.
Well, you've watched us. I think you mentioned you've seen an episode, so I'd rather let you kick it off. I mean, you speak all over the place. You should probably be teaching us how to do this. So just curious, like, what do you want to talk about?
Well, well, thank you, Scott. That's nice of you to open it up like that. But maybe we could talk about some of the things you discussed in your intro today. So we talked a little bit about the Katy Trail, which, by the way, I personally believe is the greatest amenity that the city of Dallas actually has. It's a 3.5 mile urban linear park. It's just had a tremendous impact on the quality of life, but more importantly, on an economic impact on the city. We've done some analysis on that. John, you probably have the data more than I do, but the last I saw is like a $3.5 billion economic impact on the community, the Katy Trail.
Infrastructure.
Yep, exactly. And I'm sure it's greater than that today, but that was the last number I saw. We have nearly 3 million visitors a year to the Katy Trail. If you think about that for a second, that's a big number. And you'll feel that when you're out there on a Saturday morning or during rush hours at 5 o'clock on a spring day.
Yeah.
You can barely move on the Katy Trail. But in any event, it's one of the great amenities of this city. It truly is.
I was on it last night, actually. It's a phenomenon. There's a lot of phenomenons people have shared with me, more experienced trail goers than over the years I've gone, but it wouldn't be on any regularity. And I noticed that when it does get crowded, you almost sometimes feel like you're in a conversation. People are walking at your pace.
Sure.
And I feel like I want to look at them and be like, not that I'm overhearing, but you're so close to them and they're talking and it's like, luckily, who knows, you could join in.
Amazing. It really is. The other thing that's fascinating to me is when you spend a lot of time out there, you actually hear multiple foreign languages.
Yeah.
You really, so that's the feeling, the urban feel that you really want to experience in a diverse community. And, we don't have that. We're not a New York. We're not San Francisco. We don't have the pedestrian orientation. But on the other hand, we're moving in that direction every day. And so it's a real positive feeling.
I feel like Dallas is the country's largest international, open, and even progressive city. Like of all the cities in the U.S., I feel like we are international. And I think to your point, like you feel it on the trail, but I don't know. I think it's happening and we just don't realize it when we're here.
Absolutely. Think about what's happening in 2026. The World Cup is coming to Dallas.
Yeah.
9 games, more than any other city in North America North America is hosting, obviously. 9 games coming here, And it's highly likely, although we can't announce this yet, but it's highly likely we'll be awarded the International Communications Center for FIFA and the World Cup. And if that happens, that's, as our friends from in the media know, I can mention Ron Corning's name maybe.
Yeah.
As they know, that has a bigger impact almost than the 9 games. And the 9 games are they say are the equivalent of 9 Super Bowls occurring during that relatively short period of time.
Wow.
But the International Communications Center is a multi-month commitment to downtown Dallas. And it'll be housed most likely at the K. Bailey Hutchison Convention Center.
Are the 9 games all played at Cowboy Stadium?
No.
Yes,
they
is
are.
the answer to your question.
Okay.
But it's not called Cowboy Stadium.
AT&T?
It's not called AT&T Stadium. What's really interesting about this, and I just met with the mayor of Arlington, Jim Ross, and it's fascinating. I went up and thanked him for his magnanimous gesture of being willing to call AT&T Stadium. They're changing the name of it to Dallas Stadium.
Wow.
So, and it shows you, by the way, and if you talk to people like Mike Rosa, do you all know Mike? Yeah, I'm sure you probably know Mike.
Remind me who Mike is?
Mike is the head of economic development for the city
Mike,
of
yes.
Dallas. I mean, for the Dallas Regional Chamber.
Right.
And you know, there's a question about how do we brand our region. And so if you think about it, we're often referred to as North Texas, the Metroplex. What do we call this area? Dallas-Fort Worth? Well, Mike, who, by the way, has spent the early part of his career working for the Fort Worth Economic Development Corporation. So he has a real passion for Tarrant County and West. But he said, it doesn't matter what we call it. This area is referred to internationally as Dallas.
It's funny. I was going to ask you when I knew you were coming, and I think you sort of alluded to it, how much collaboration there is from your current role with the likes of Frisco, Salina. As a guy that's grown up here, you know, each of these trade areas are massive, really.
It's amazing.
Right.
So, and you've heard me say this, John, and Scott, I'll share with you. You know, the good news is that we're a region of about a metropolitan statistical area of close to 8.3 million people now. And it's also the good news is that we have 16 cities within our region with populations of over 100,000 people, 9 of which have populations of over 200,000 people. By the way, just as an aside, by the end of the first quarter of 2025, we will be the only metropolitan area in the country with 2 cities with populations of over 1 million people. Think about that for a second. So, but my point in answering back to your question, Scott, and I'm sorry I'm going off on tangents here, but back to your question, yes, I mean, that's the best part of it. But remember also that each one of these entities, these municipalities, have their own ecosystems, their own economic needs. And so it becomes a highly competitive environment. So one of our big challenges is how do we manage the regional collaboration that's required to continue to see the kind of experience and growth we're having right now. By the way, you bring up my favorite topic these days is think about Salina and Prosper.
Yeah.
These are towns that were unthinkable. You just don't even know where they are. They're truly exurbs. However, here's some data points for you. Plano is in effect built out at about 305,000 people. That's a huge city. Frisco is larger than Plano in landmass. But here's the biggest kicker. Salina is 1.5 times the landmass of Frisco.
Oh boy.
Built out Salina, which is today 35,000 people, built out, it's projected to be 375,000 people.
And I'd say this to my friends. I mean, we're Texans. So I say to my friends, and I know we're starting to get people paying attention from all over the place who really haven't spent much time in our area, and they see it on a map, right? So they see, if you know nothing else about geography, it's expansive size, and that really gives you some perspective.
Yeah.
So I love that you shared that, because when you drive, and I drove out to the PGA headquarters shortly. I took my in-laws. They're from St. Louis, and they were blown away. And we hear about Universal coming, and I don't know what's next, right?
I think you mentioned, Scott, the expansive size of the city, how it's growing. And I feel like that probably contributes to the challenge of creating really robust mass transit. What are your feelings about transit?
Yeah, it's infrastructure. So infrastructure is of the big three issues that we all have to come to grips with. And I'll just frame that real quickly. It's talent pipeline, which translates into education, which we can talk about more, Scott. The second piece of that is around housing availability and affordability. But the third and really critical component is infrastructure. And now infrastructure comes in a myriad of ways. It's transportation options, it's public transportation options, but it also translates into access to broadband, the electric grid, water. These are major issues that we have to think way out into the future to be able to manage, which, by the way, today at 8.3 million people, we're projected to be by 2050, 12.5 million people. That would be the equivalent of adding the population of the state of Oklahoma to North Texas. Think about that for a second. How do we meet the needs of that ballooning population? So back to the question, and I apologize for going off on these tangents, but so public transportation is to us at the Chamber is a critical component of this infrastructure discussion, and particularly DART. In fact, I just came from a meeting to this to meet with y'all today, where we met with representatives of the North Texas Council of Governments and a major engineering and design firm here that are working on the high-speed rail between Fort Worth and Dallas, not the high-speed rail that we've all been hearing about between Dallas and Houston. And so there's a lot of activity there. But that's just one example of it. But DART represents a significant opportunity for us. And yes, we've built out a great system to date, but the challenges along with it are things like the last mile. How do we get people from a DART station? How do we get people to the Forest DART station so they can go to the zoo?
Right.
And so that last mile solution we haven't cracked the nut on that one yet. There are some perception issues relative to DART, relative to safety and security, cleanliness. I can assure you, in knowing the leadership of DART, that's real. Those are perceptions. They are not realities. And there's been major changes with how things are operating today at DART. So yes, we do have, you mentioned earlier, Jon, about frequency. Mm-hmm. Yes, we'd all love to have more frequency, but we're also restricted because the major artery of DART comes through downtown. Everything comes through downtown. And remember, we were talking about adding a second line downtown and going underground. That's not on the table anymore, at least for the foreseeable future. So that we're restricted somewhat relative to frequency. So, but at the same time, we are very bullish on DART and what it can accomplish for the communities that it serves in the eastern part of the Metroplex.
And you mentioned education. I know you've talked about that. Hearing previously you talk about Amazon 2 and kind of why Dallas wasn't the winner, right? We have everything. You talked about, I think in this interview I saw about the pie chart, which I loved, about the diversity in commerce, really industry, right? We have virtually everything you can think of here. We're not, skewed in any one specific industry. But you mentioned education. So I'd love your thoughts about, obviously we didn't win and they didn't award Dallas that. And I think that has something to do with it. But your perspective going forward on where we are relative to what we learned in that. And I would love for you to share what your thoughts were about that and what you think it means going forward.
Sure. I think what Amazon HQ2, the whole project that was discussed, first of all, the Dallas Regional Chamber did a masterful job on managing all of the various communities that wanted to participate throughout the region that wanted to participate in that RFP process. And but Amazon quickly narrowed their options down to they wanted to be urban. If you think about their Seattle campus, they're very urban, and so they immediately started zeroing in on downtown Dallas, and particularly like the Cedars area, things like that. But yes, you're right, Scott. We were this close to being awarded that business, but the challenge we had was meeting their talent pipeline. And so the perception was that during the RFP process, they compressed the number of years that they wanted to hire 50,000 high-paid system engineers, and they felt that the best way to access that size of need was on the Eastern Seaboard, where there's a lot of higher educational institutions that could feed into that quickly. Now, we could have easily immigrated a lot of that talent.
That's what we're doing now.
Exactly. We are doing that now. But nevertheless, it did expose the fact that the perception at least is that we can't produce that kind of talent that quickly.
We had Brent Beasley on here, who runs Fort Worth Education Partnership, and he pointed out that 6 in 10 students in Fort Worth don't perform at grade level. And that's not unique to Fort Worth. That's like a big city issue. And so when you're not producing talent at the low levels, it's hard to really create an engine to provide the type of labor that the state needs to continue to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And one of my fundamental issues, I've have a daughter that recently graduated from the University of Georgia, and one currently at the University of Texas. And the comparison between the two universities and fundamentally the states is that Georgia has an amazing program. I tout it to everybody I talk to that if you're a top student in Georgia, you can get basically full tuition paid for. They have something called the Hope Scholarship. And what it is basically, I call it the thoroughbred program. They're investing in their own that will then come back and develop commerce, become lawyers, doctors, in the state of Georgia. Georgia Tech does the same. So if I were doing, something like that, and to your point, we're excited when our kids can get into the University of Texas or A&M, our elite universities, SMU, really, all of them. I think we need to John's point, we need to do better at the lowest levels, getting them on grade level. And then I think at the higher levels, making it accessible, investing in our best, right? So that we can do that, so we can meet the needs.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a huge opportunity there going forward. Something I hope one day we learn how to do.
Well, our chamber, we have strong collaborations and partnerships with the DISD and the RISD, which both of you are graduates of the RISD.
Top products, right?
That's right.
Well, exactly. Let me be clear. John will tell you.
He dissected cats, he tells me.
Yeah, right.
I was really good at the student organizations. John thinks I wasn't as good at the standardized testing, but he wasn't grading them. And there weren't Chads on those, so we're fine. Right. I know the scores were real, and I'm here to talk about it.
That's for sure. But I will say that, and we have such high regard for what Stephanie Alzalde, Superintendent Alzalde for the DISD, and Tabitha Branham for the RISD, what they're doing in their respective districts. And we think that they're on such a positive trajectory. They really are. With options, choice, schools that are available, and we're seeing significant improvement in student achievement. The challenge is still there. It's exactly what you were talking about earlier, John. The challenge is still there, and it's going to continue to be unless we bring everybody up. We're going to continue to be challenged in that area. But we're very bullish on what the DISD and RISD doing from a public school perspective. Now, I will say, unfortunately, that our state is not doing a very good job relative to funding our public schools. And, we can talk about that we can talk about the motivation for that or whatever. That's secondary. The issue is that at $6,100 per student is our basic allotment right now from the state of Texas.
Right.
That puts us down at, in the $49.50 range in states. It's an embarrassment. And yes, there's a recognition that it needs to be funded more. And I think our state legislature will do that. But unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet.
It's amazing that elite private schools charge 5 to 6 times that amount, maybe 7 times that amount per student.
Now that's not. There's more to what's
you can get
invested
a free lunch,
in a student
right,
and all that. But the point is that that's the basic student
baseline
allotment that comes from the state of Texas to our public schools. And it's just,
I think Jon and I are both big proponents of the public school systems. I mean, we're products of it, and we were fortunate in RSD, but I'm encouraged in many ways. I think we have a long way to go.
No question.
And there's more to learn. To connect with today's guest, Ken Malcolmson, you can connect with him on LinkedIn.
And to learn more about the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce, you can check out their website, ndcc.org.
So I know that you heard our conversation as we led in to introduce you. And I think there's a little bit of housekeeping for Jon, Ken, and I'd love for you to just share that.
Sure, I'd be more than happy to, because I always love to share things, to clarify things that Jon talks about. That Jon is 100% accurate on just about everything he says. But I heard one thing in the opening comments that he said that there were 5 cities in the state of Texas that are in the top 20 cities in the country in population. And that's actually not accurate. There's actually 6. So if you think about that, I mean, that's amazing that John Alschuler actually was, and he was less than. Usually you'd think he'd be hyperbolic, right. So.
Wait, what is it? Dallas, Houston, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio. What's the 6th?
El Paso.
Wow.
Well, for those people in El Paso, Jon apologizes. And for everybody else, let's just take a second here. Jon, you stand corrected. All right, Ken. We're moving on. But I'm curious, how have you enjoyed the Olympics? Any thoughts about that?
I'm passionate about it. I just love the Olympics. My wife and I both, and we'll come home every night. Now I read ESPN.com all day long,
right.
And so I know what's happened, but we won't watch anything. I won't watch any video. I won't watch any Twitter feed, nothing until we get home and watch the highlights in the evening from 6:30 to 10. And some of the things are just, it's downright remarkable. It's emotional. But some of the experiences, we're big track and field fans. My wife is a marathon runner. I'm a retired marathon runner, and spent a lot of time my youth in track and field. And it's the Cole Hawker 1,500 meters, which is just remarkable. The Rooks steeplechase experience last night. How about the Quincy Hall 400 meters, coming from 5th place to win in the last 75 meters of a 400 meter race. 50 meters even. It was just remarkable to see those kind of things. But then you add in how about the women's rugby match?
Yeah, it's all fun.
That was the equivalent of the Alabama-Auburn game where Auburn ran the kickoff back 109 yards or whatever to win the game with no time left. These are just, you can't make this stuff up. It's just
what's interesting to me is a lot of people don't know. You mentioned track and field, and just for clarity, I did not do much track and field. Jon will validate that.
I was fast until 8th grade.
Yeah. Which, by the way, when we grew up, because we like to talk about our time on the playground. I think in 6th grade, it was like the first time we had like inter-school track meets. So we were competing against other schools. Well, the athletes, where I was cheering for my friends who were the athletes who were competing against the other schools. Right. But what I find interesting is these nuances of the rules of sport that we think we know because we watch popular sports, and then the international rules, which change some of the rules of sport, and then the fundamental things that you wouldn't even think about, where the photo finish in a race, I learned the other day, has nothing to do with like it would in a horse race where the horse's head is crossing the finish line. It's actually your torso.
It's torso.
Right? Your torso.
It's all torso.
Right? So like, you just think it's, if you, taking sport aside, like these guys train millions of hours. And like they know down to a step if they're going to win or lose the race from step one, right? And to know that you have to put your torso through, you might be actually running at the same pace, but because your torso is the milliseconds faster, you win the race. And that's the difference between, your name in history and never being heard of again.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, as it relates to that race, a lot of these things just point out how thin the margin is at the highest levels.
Yeah.
I mean, first place, second place, third place is close, real close. And you have the finest people in the world who've been spending their lives on this endeavor. And that's how close they are.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And you think about it, it's also the mental aspect of
Sure.
that. You could be the most finely tuned athlete in the world, but if you don't have the right mental makeup and you don't have the confidence that you can win this, it's a little bit like we talk about it a lot with like the PGA Golf Tour.
Right.
The difference between a guy that's on the tour or a woman that's on the tour and the one that's playing in college, that's a star in college, is minute. It's minute, but it all gets up there. Well, the physical differences are no different.
Well, I always say I'm a golfer. I say the difference is you got to put 4 days together. That is a aggregate of consistency. That doesn't mean you won't have moments where you have, but over the 4-day period, being mostly consistent is what wins. Yeah. You can have a low round, but then you look back and you're too far out. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I had the best round of my life yesterday.
Did you really?
88 with Craig Kessler.
No kidding.
PGA COO.
And where did you play this?
We played at the Grapevine Golf Course.
Oh, I bet that's a good
course.
Community.
Yeah, it's a good course.
It was awesome.
Yeah, it's a good course.
It was great.
A Muni. Wow.
Yeah, I like that course.
For you.
Can I also add that I have 3 North Dallas Chamber batting titles?
Seriously,
did you know that?
I think we've talked about that. It's not on the wall in our offices, but nevertheless, I think we've discussed that before.
I wanted to make sure the audience also knew.
Ken, in case you didn't know, it's another one of the teams I was selected out on.
And it wasn't even select.
I know.
It was like a level below select, but like you go play SVAA, we're going to play Chamber.
I know. I was not invited. That's shocking.
Yes, amazing.
And John likes to say, now he questions why he wasn't invited to my bar mitzvah, and you've got your answer.
Yeah.
So we don't often bring up movies. I think it's twice today that we're going to talk about movies because, to your point, when I was falling asleep, sometimes I like to put on a movie just for like 5 minutes of something I want to see. I will go back and look at old movies. It's a behavior I have. And I love the movie Boys in the Boat. Did you guys see that movie or read the book?
Of course.
No, I'm familiar.
I did both.
You're probably going to challenge whether or not I read the book, but just rest assured that I happened to cut it on last night, and I like just let the very beginning scene. It's like this pristine, beautiful, shot of the water. Like they're just leading this. I'm like, I stopped the movie. Like I didn't even get into like the credits because I'm like, no, I want to watch the whole thing as a result of the Olympics. That story, to your point, the precision, what it takes. And of course, then you add in the whole drama of the history of what was going on in the world. Exactly. And, just all of it. So it's a fascinating time. Did you like the movie?
Oh, well, I like the book a lot more than the movie.
Yes.
Because it was really hard to take the content of that book and make it into a movie in a 2 hour and 15-minute movie. That just had to be very challenging for the producers of it. But no, it's just a very poignant story. My oldest son actually lived in Seattle for 10 years. And we met when actually went out and saw the boathouse, and it's still there.
We're in Seattle.
Today. Yeah, it's right on Lake Washington, right on the University of Washington campus.
What's interesting for me that people that don't follow competitive rowing, right, is that it's mostly a northeast, the Schuylkill River and the Philadelphia area.
And Charles.
And also Indiana.
Yeah. It's these interesting pockets. And I did not know Seattle had that. So that was a thing.
Yeah. Well, in Berkeley.
Berkeley, right.
Yeah.
So I thought, and it was just one thing that's interesting to me in my rehab for my heart transplant, the two therapists, my occupational therapist and physical therapist at UT Southwestern were young women. One of the two was on the rowing team at Texas. She was the coxswain. And I asked we got into this debate whether we think that individual, that role is an athlete, because they're not rowing, but critical to the success. Thoughts about that?
Are they on the team?
They are on the team. Big part of the team.
They're an athlete.
I can't remember in Boys in the Boat. Remember they had two.
Yeah,
and
switched.
And then he switched, and that's what kind of clicked for him. I can't remember. Was he a rower? I can't remember. Or
I assume they have to.
They have to know. They have to know everything.
They have to know They have to know the fundamentals.
Yeah. So I'm suggesting that they're definitely athletes, but more importantly, they're some people consider them the most valuable player on the team.
Yeah. Oh, I hear that. Again, not invited to row ever, but we mentioned books. So just a question I like to ask all the time is, are you reading anything compelling, anything you suggest that we should read? Or John will tell me I probably need to listen to it, but that's okay.
There's two books right now that I might recommend, both of which have a local flavor to them. The first one that I'm in the midst of right now, and I've been meaning to read it for a long time, is You've Been Chosen by Cent Marshall. Mm-hmm. And Cent is, as everyone knows, is the former AT&T executive who's now the CEO of the Mavs, president and CEO of the Mavs, and first black woman to be the president of an NBA, woman to be a president of an NBA franchise. And so she's become a friend. I just have such high regard for Cent. But her book is really well written, and it's about her journey with cancer. But at the same time, it brings in her entire life experiences into that. And it's just a fascinating read. The second one is relatively new by another famous Dallas journalist. And I know Ron Corning would know her really well, and that's Rena Peterson. She was a former editor of the Dallas Morning News. But Rena wrote a book. It's called King of Diamonds. And it's a true story, although it reads like a fiction book, but it's a true story about a jewel thief in Dallas in the 50s and 60s. And maybe, it was just in the 50s and 60s, not into the 70s. And it's just a fascinating story. It is 647 pages long, though, so that makes it a little bit more challenging. But nevertheless,
I don't think I can do it, John. I don't think I've read 647 pages.
I don't think you have.
According to you,
I don't think you have.
I know John doesn't have an antenna, so he watches a lot of local. Doesn't have cable. I know he doesn't have any subscription radio services. Hoping maybe you do, but what do you listen to? And as it goes to local specifically, where do you get your news? That sort of thing.
Yeah, that's great. So our chamber just did an event with Grant Moise from the Dallas Morning News, who's also a great collaborator and friend. And he just hired a new public editor who's basically designed to be the mirror between the readers and the 180 journalists that they have in place there. But the key here is how do we find sources of information? So if you just pick up on Twitter or you pick up something on just on any social media site, they're not the source of information. They're just accumulating information to share with you. So that's why I think it's so important that we have entities like the Dallas Morning News, like our local television and radio stations. that really, I think, focus on local issues. So I was laughing when Jon was talking earlier about not listening to much on his car radio. I got, just like everyone, I got everything you can possibly imagine, including Sirius subscription and everything else. And bottom line is I only listen to two things in my car. One is KRLD for news, particularly in the morning and in the evening drive times. And then because it's highly localized, and I really appreciate that. And then I also listen to KERA, and our public radio station is a jewel. It's a real jewel and a great asset for this community, and we all need to support that. But they spend a lot of time on local issues as well.
So why would you carry the subscriptions?
It came with the car.
So
No, it just came with the car.
Yours didn't actually?
Well, it does, but like 90 days or a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one doesn't. This one.
When it was on for 90 days for the trial, did you use it then?
I didn't.
You boycotted. You just you didn't even know what they were, so you weren't gonna.
It doesn't look easy to utilize.
Oh, it's easy.
Really?
Yeah. I've been a long time. I grew up actually a little bit in the radio industry, but I could see the transition. So it's good to hear. I do think KERA is amazing.
Yeah.
One final thought. I just cannot tell you, as I learned about you, and grateful for Jon to suggest and you to accept to join us today. But I mean, your career is amazing. I look at what you've done in sort of the insurance business, healthcare. You've done a lot of things, and now more recently, your commitment to a lot of things civic. And I think you started at your end of your career. So I'm curious, what drove you to do that first, and then kind of on a go forward, how do you see yourself doing this through the rest of your life, and what does it mean to your legacy?
Yeah. Well, Scott, thanks for that question, because it's something that I think about a lot. But so I woke up one day in my corporate career, and my corporate career is almost 41 years. And it was probably when I was about 50. And I woke up one day and I said, I'm not waking up every day thinking about how I'm going to improve earnings per share for Humana. I need to wake up in a different way. And that needs to be, how do I make a difference in the community? So I kind of shifted my thinking, and it was motivated by two things. One was my parents were integrally involved in our community in Chicago area. They were my mother was on the school board, first female member of the school board in the community we were in. My father was a precinct chairman for his political party. And, it just, everything, they were just heavily engaged in the community. And I thought back about that, and I said, oh, gosh, I'm hardly engaged. Yes, I served on a bunch of boards and things, but not to the extent that they were engaged. And then secondly, I read a book that I think everybody probably knows about, and it's by a renowned Dallasite by the name of Bob Buford, and the book was Halftime. And if you haven't read Halftime, I would highly recommend it. But it basically is the subtitle of Halftime is, how do you go from being successful to being significant? And it's taking stock of your life at about the halftime of your life. So I read that when I was in my late 40s, and that kind of shifted my thinking and things like that. And so then my focus was on, okay, now what can I do to support what happens in our community? And so that's when I got much more engaged, was real involved with our alma mater, as Jon knows, serving on the board of trustees there and serving as the chair of our alumni board at SMU, but also real involved with the Dallas Regional Chamber. I served on their board for 8 years. And all of that kind of led to other opportunities to serve in the community. And so I can't count the number of boards that I've served on that are nonprofit related, but the one that I'm most passionate about is the YMCA. And I'm the current board chair of the Y of Metro Dallas. And we have 17 Ys and 3 camps, and we serve 220,000 people a year. And at the Y through all of these programs. Here's an interesting factoid for you. Of those 220,000 people, 2/3 of them never step foot into one of our branches because our service portfolio is so broad.
Right.
And, when you think of childcare and educational opportunities, adventure guides, you name it, it's just everything we've got that we offer that's way beyond the physical structure of the Y. So in any event, it's just been a real pleasure to work in that area. And then the other one that I'm real passionate about is a school called the Momentous Institute. And John, I know, is very familiar with it. In fact, he asks questions about it all the time. But the Momentous Institute is a fascinating educational model. It's age 3 through 5th grade. And it's a laboratory school. So it's not a charter and it's not a public school. It's a laboratory school. And we kind of work at the intersection of social and emotional health, particularly we call it mental health, and academics. And we kind of pair our teachers with psychotherapists. Wow. So we teach children who come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. We teach them how to cope. How do you cope with all of the turmoil, all of the drama in your life so you can learn, be in a learning environment? And so we teach them coping skills. And it's a remarkable model. We don't touch them after 5th grade. And again, remember, all have to come from an economically disadvantaged background. We don't touch them after 5th grade, and yet 97% of them graduate from high school, and 89% of them go on to higher education.
Well, I got to say, it has been an absolute pleasure. I can't wait to take a few walks with you.
I'm looking forward to it, Scott.
I might be a regular. I'm gonna have to figure out how to get on your calendar. And Jon, you continue to shock me. I just, the amount of friends that Jon has that he's introduced me to, and I hope in return I have the same. I do think what you're doing and will continue to do, I'm going to be watching and know that I would love to support the things that you do. I think there's so many you mentioned. I'm like, what can I do with Ken next? So that's great. And also, we didn't have the kinds of things that you talk about. I think first of all, we didn't have the people like you. So there needs to be more people like Ken. Wow. I think we can all, you're a model for us. I know that for sure. Mm-hmm. And in terms of coping, just know, I wish that school was there for me, but Jon taught me coping. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And
you're in trouble if I'm teaching coping.
Well, that may be true, but it was all we had, Jon. Yeah, so thank you for that. But it's been such a great discussion. Look forward to many more. And Jon, thanks again.
You're welcome. Yeah. Ken, thank you for your leadership.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to join you all today. Enjoyed it. Thank you.